what are you doing to protect your physical assets? What are you doing to protect your industrial control systems? And finally, one of the panelists, his response was, I pray a lot. I couldn't believe it.
Welcome to the Industrial Cybersecurity Insider. In each episode, we dive into the world of industrial cybersecurity. Join us as we cover the latest trends, innovations, and practical insights as we talk with leaders and practitioners across the industry. Gear up and let's get into this week's episode.
Hi, I'm Craig Duckworth.
And I'm Dino Busalaki. And today we have a special guest, one of the partners at the design group, Scott Cargill. Welcome, Scott.
Yeah, thanks, Dino. Thanks, Craig. It's a pleasure to join today.
Yeah, so we're coming up on a year, or a little over a year, since the design group has acquired a OT cybersecurity firm. And the design group being a manufacturing organization, right, that had the thought leadership and the vision to move into a cybersecurity practice. So maybe you want to chat a little bit about that, and then some of the articles.
Yeah, I can't believe it's been a year, and I'll just take a few minutes just to reflect on it. But I did have the pleasure to lead that integration of Velta Technologies into Design Group, and as I think back over the year, I couldn't have envisioned a better match, a better marriage in our companies. Design Group being a large system integrator, very obviously heavy into manufacturing automation, but also that coupled with our industrial network and infrastructure capabilities, combining with the cybersecurity engineering team that you and Craig brought over and we talked about this in the past, it's 1 + 1 = 3. And it's just been a fantastic ride. I've learned a lot. And being with obviously, sharing the office with you and Craig and the rest of the team. And I couldn't have asked for a better experience. The team that you brought over, they're hungry. They understand the industry. They understand the IT, the OT, and not only that, they're just good people. It's been really a lot of fun to have the team as part of Design Group.
Yeah, the term that Jim and I like using is a very versatile people, right? Yeah. So you've been spending a lot of time in the data center arena.
I have.
A little bit about that. And
So that's a great point, Dino. At Design Group, the data center business has boomed over the last 2 to 3 years, and we've only been doing data center work for the last 5 years. But as of lately, and of course, you got to be living under a rock if you don't read the news and hear about the AI boom and the reason why they're building so many of these data centers so quickly across the United States or across the world. And so Design Group we were fortunate to get involved, and we are currently, and our scope is primarily around the data center building, the building management system, so getting cold air to the servers, and then also the electrical power monitoring systems. And we know these data centers require a significant amount of power. And so, we're doing work, Dino and Craig, across almost all of the hyperscalers in the U.S., and we've enjoyed the ride. So it's been an exciting time for us in the data center market.
Yeah. Well, and this comes on the heels. I saw today, for those that haven't seen it yet, Stargate Partners just announced that Foxconn, Ohio, was the next massive site for part of that OpenAI / Oracle / whoever, SoftBank, and their next phase of that $500 billion infrastructure piece. So it just keeps growing every single day. Like you said, Scott, every day is a new investment by someone, somewhere. Organizations and cities are, lining up for it.
And they're moving so fast. Some of these buildings, are being built in 6 months. And what's interesting is, they're moving so fast. There's things they're not considering, and one of those are OT cybersecurity. I mean, these are buildings that are highly automated, and it's just kind of ironic. You've got these data centers that are focused on AI and these advanced technologies, but yet when you just take a step back and say, what are they doing as far as their physical asset security posture? It's surprising that very little is being done. And so, we see it as a great opportunity for us, but at the same time, it's also just a bit surprising.
Yeah, it's back to that whole IT/OT convergence, right? And what we witness in the manufacturing space, where there's still a gap,
yeah,
between the people responsible for OT assets, whether they're the power systems and building automation, building management systems in these data centers, or packaging lines on the plant floor. There's still a gap between these IT and OT organizations that it's not been closing at a rapid rate, in my view.
And Dino, you brought up something, and you kind of talked about manufacturing, and it's the same use case. It's the same situation that these data centers are, that a food and beverage or a pharmaceutical plant, where you do have this IT OT convergence going on. And I was at a conference last week. It was a data center investment conference, and you had the hyperscalers there, the usual suspects. You had a lot of smaller companies that are investing in co-location data centers, and you had people from the entire supply chain there. And there was a panel specifically. They were talking about the modern operations of a data center. So we think about a data center no different than a manufacturing plant, and like I mentioned before, there's a tremendous amount of automation. And they were talking about actually using their own product, using AI to improve the operations of these data centers. And their service level agreements with these large companies, are, I don't know what the uptime percentages are, but they're contractually required to have just incredible uptime. And they were talking about using AI, and just now starting to use AI to improve their operations. And I asked a question. I asked a question to the panelists. Said, "Okay, so what are you doing to protect your physical assets? What are you doing to protect your industrial control systems?" Specifically, of my interest was the BMS, the building management system, and the EPMS, the electrical power monitoring system. What are you doing to protect those control systems and the related network? And there was five panelists up there. And first of all, you could hear a pin drop. It was like a good couple of seconds to silence. And finally, one of the panelists, his response was, "I pray a lot." That was his response. And I couldn't believe it. It just blew me away. "I pray a lot" is a response. And they went on to say, and kind of going back to the kind of the correlation between data centers and manufacturing, the technology is moving so fast, that the servers, the power and the size of these servers are moving so fast, these building systems are having to keep up with this technology. And so these building automation systems are quickly becoming obsolete, or they're quickly having to retrofit these legacy systems. And so they talked about how they're connecting more of these legacy systems to maybe some of the more modern building management systems. And they talk about, guess what? Expanding the attack surface for the bad guys. Mm-hmm. So it was as if I was talking to a food and beverage manufacturing plant, but it was a data center. They have the same challenges. In fact, they're probably further behind than many of the other industries we work in.
The folks that design and build the building automation systems, the power systems, I think they're going to have to start bringing that cybersecurity technology into the work that they're doing. I don't think you can rely so much on IT to make that happen, as much as this OT ecosystem is going to have to start moving the other direction, in my view. Which is why the design group had the forethought of picking up and building a practice for OT cybersecurity. In order for us to be, as we're designing, whether it's packaging lines or a plant or a data center, and start looking at how we implement OT cybersecurity technologies into those control systems that we're designing for the clients.
Yeah. And I wonder, I'm curious, why do you think that they haven't considered this? You walk to a data center and it's like Fort Knox. The physical perimeter of these data securities are highly secure. Getting in the building, highly secure, but yet they haven't considered protecting their automation. I wonder why that's the case. Any thoughts to that?
I think a lot of the organizations that are running the clean rooms, that the data is coming from that's being sold to Oracle or OpenAI or whoever's using the data for the AI modeling on the market. They're so focused on the data and not so much the infrastructure that supports the data. So you look at the chillers that are cooling the GPU processing racks that NVIDIA is providing. You look at the chillers that are maintaining the building, and you take a step back and you think of the heat that those processors are generating and the amount of minutes, and it's not hours, it's minutes that that data center can operate before it loses all of those hundreds of millions of dollars in process power and it goes offline. Because if it can't keep a monitored temperature and keep it at an operating side, but they're not thinking that. They're thinking, how do I ensure that the processing power is there, and do I get this to the next level to run those large language models and all of the AI machine learning that the center is designed to do, not the functionality of how do I maintain operational ability of the facility.
Yeah, Craig, it's funny you say that, because you're spot on. I kind of going back to this panel that I asked this question. I think there was 5 panelists, and 3 of them were talking about what we're familiar with, right? Just protecting the assets and protecting PLCs and the SCADA and those sort of things. But there's another, the other 2 panelists were responding to my question, and they pivoted quickly about protecting the data.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't ask about protecting the data. I asked about protecting the assets. But I don't really think they really truly understood the question, and they just gravitated to what they know best.
Because when it goes to those physical outcomes, what we're talking about, it gets in that translation between IT and OT it gets missed, right? Even with the technology, and we have one in our panel shop, you guys have seen it, where you've got these cooling systems. We're talking about the building envelope, but now you got cooling systems that are actually providing chilled water within the server platform, right? And the technology behind that, and those are control systems running that. But there are 2 very different practices, if you will, managing. One that's doing the data side, and one that's actually doing the physical outcome side. Yeah, right? Getting back to that IT/OT convergence, that sometimes it's still got some wide gaps in it.
Big gaps.
You look at organizations that are undertaking this. Normally there is a GC that's responsible for making this building this building, putting up concrete walls, they're putting the infrastructure in, and then they're turning it over to someone to install all of this high-tech data racks with GPUs and all this stuff in it. And they're different. There's normally an IT middle layer in there that's responsible for kind of the liaison, I guess, if you want to call that, between the 2, and they're focused all on that data layer because they don't understand that control layer that's managing, that Dino says, those industrial assets that are responsible for maintaining that building envelope.
Yeah, and
that's the gap.
That layer you're talking about, it's the network, right? Mm-hmm. That's usually the demarc. And I think when it comes to the handoff with control systems that's run on a network, it's not necessarily running on the IT network, right? And again, the disciplines on that side of the fence are not looking at cybersecurity, because in their mind, they probably still think a lot of those systems are isolated. They're not connected,
Mm-hmm.
And the PLC and/or other devices that they're using is that stopgap measure is managed by somebody else. It's like the firewall, right? So if you look at the firewall in the IDMZ, 99% of the time, the firewalls are managed by IT. OT is not managing their own firewalls, right? And what the OT people have done is they've used assets that they own, that they're responsible for, that they pick and choose as that segmentation device. So whether it's a jump box, a PLC, an HMI with dual NICs in it, whatever the case may be, that's the way that they've separated this in a logical form. It's not a physical separation; it's a logical separation.
Yeah.
So there's still a pathway there.
Yeah. And Dino, you mentioned, you got me thinking about another conversation I had a couple of months ago. We were asking about cybersecurity, and his comment was almost like, "Well, IT told me that I shouldn't have to worry about that." It was almost like it's not my job to worry about that because I was told that we're low risk. And then as we were talking more and more about it, at the end of the conversation, he goes, "Hey, send me all your information. I'm going to make sure that other controls leaders are educated on these threats." And so in his mind, I think it was never even really a consideration because he didn't think it was because he was told it wasn't really a high risk.
Yeah, well, in IT, they lose sight of who those end users are, right? So whether it's the tech, the engineer, or the maintenance person that's walking in there with their laptop connecting into that environment, or somebody remoting into that environment, that's the blind spot that IT has, and so they don't know what those applications are. They don't know necessarily much about the operating systems or the network. And so they get further and further removed from really being able to assist on how I can improve that cybersecurity posture, which again goes back to my earlier statement that the OT ecosystem is going to have to figure this out. Where that individual that was told by IT not to worry about it, their response should have been, I am going to worry about it. And here's how I'm going to go worrying about it, right? Here's the things I'm going to do. And I got to find people in my industry that are doing this, right? And we all know who in our competitive environment, how many of our colleagues and or competitors actually have OT cybersecurity practices within engineering firms, manufacturing firms, specialize in these industries. And it's a very short list.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, you go back to something that you said earlier, Scott, in the conversation about how these data center environments are now connecting legacy assets and they're trying to figure this all out. And as they do, they're expanding significantly that attack surface. So, as you're trying to figure this out from an IT perspective, you got to realize that, there's an entire controls layer down below what you're accustomed to seeing that now has vulnerabilities riddled throughout it because you've connected it to all of the IT assets that are running that data center.
Yeah.
From a clean room perspective.
Yeah, and I think in people, it's funny because we obviously we're all very much in tune with what's happening in manufacturing, and I think a lot of times people don't really look at a data center and think of it through that lens. It looks like it's just a building, right? It's just a building, but we know, right? It's much more than a building. Just because you don't see bottlers and fillers and packaging lines and robots moving around. It's you walk in a data center and all you see a lot of lights and you hear a bunch of humming, right? But you don't see all these moving parts and automation. But the reality is it is highly automated. And if these cybersecurity, if a data center were to get attacked and they were to take their cooling system, whether it's liquid cooled or air cooled, offline, to your point, it would just be minutes before these data centers are shut down. And same thing with the electrical power. You interrupt that electrical power. Yeah, they have a lot of redundancy and backup generation, but that will only last so long. And again, this disruption would be terrible for these data centers, very costly. But I think it's because you look at a data center, you don't think of it as a manufacturing plant. You think of it as just a building, but it's so much more than that.
Well, so but if you take one step back from that, you look at the automation surrounding it, the interior piece, the packaging line, the bottlers, the fillers is a different internal guts of the building versus racks and racks and racks and racks of NVIDIA processing units that are making compute power. But that's exponentially more expensive. Yeah, sure. It's crazy the cost of these things. So you would think that it would lend to more protection around it because the cost of replacement. You talk about downtime. What does an hour of downtime cost in a Pepsi plant or a Coke plant or a car plant, something like that? What's an hour of downtime in a 1 gig data center that's producing AI compute power? I wouldn't even know where to start, but it's a lot more than making soda or beer, I would think.
Yeah, and then there's probably penalties that go along with it, right? With these large AI-driven companies. So yeah, and I think Dino and Craig, we've been talking with various, other solution partners in this ecosystem, and this, we're not the only ones talking about this. And
Right.
so I think these hyperscalers and other companies that are investing in data centers, I can tell they're starting to get educated here. And I do think that, in the next year or even sooner, our hope is that these cybersecurity solutions are going to start getting not patched in, but designed in. And that's where I think we're going to see some significant growth in what we do, is providing these cybersecurity solutions in data centers as they become, more educated.
Yeah, they definitely are. I'm talking to a client now that's let's call it a mid-sized. They're not one of the 4 or 5 large hyperscales, but they've got
Yeah.
a ton of data centers and they're very advanced. They're building like as quick as they can put them up, and they're doing it globally. So they're in various regions and they're trying to figure out the exact same thing. And that's part of the conversation is how do we make sure that we're addressing this properly? Because there's one of me. I've got one person on my team, and I'm responsible for security for the physical control layer for our entire global organization. And there's me, and we've got 1,000 data centers or whatever that number is.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
no different than we see in a manufacturing site. They're trying to figure it out. But you're right. I believe it's coming slower than it should be. And I think that we're definitely going to see some changes in the next 12, 18 months.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think they'll follow just like IT did, right? When you talk about resource constraints or organizations that decided they weren't going to invest heavily in IT resources and they were going to rely on managed services, third parties to help them, right? And when it becomes, when you get into these newer technologies and skill sets that you need to acquire, and I think in the manufacturing industry and probably in the data center on the OT side, is you're going to have to look for organizations that have the scale and capability of being able to do that. To your point, Craig, you can't just have a couple of people, some who have never even been to some of the plants, if any of them at all, and think they're going to be able to really put together a cybersecurity strategy for 30 plants in your fleet, much less 30 data centers in your fleet, and you got 1 or 2 people doing that. You have to be close to those environments because sometimes they're unique depending on whoever the OEM or the system integrator is that put in those control systems. And then you have the life cycle is different, right? We're talking about stuff that's in place for decades, not just a few years, right? And so that's why you don't get the patch levels, updated in a consistent, constant manner. And organizations lose sight of that stuff, and the vulnerabilities just keep building, because you're not staying on top of it.
I mean, these data centers, once they're built and operational, it doesn't really require a lot of people to run these data centers. And in fact, a lot of these, and what we've learned is a lot of these, large hyperscalers, they're experts in, the advanced technology around AI, right? And the actual AI component and how that's being built and deployed. They're not experts on a manufacturing plant. We're calling it a data center. So they're relying on people like us and others to really maintain and operate those data centers, which, we're in a great position to do that. But, this cybersecurity topic is I just find it fascinating because, data centers aren't something new. Yeah, they're booming right now, but they're not something that, is brand new. So the fact that they haven't incorporated these OT solutions is again, it still kind of just blows my mind, but it's changing rapidly.
Yep.
It's going to continue to change too. They're going to look at, how do they keep up with the technology? You've got some of the most advanced technology on the clean side, and then you've got some not as advanced, although gaining momentum on the control space. So how do you marry the two? Back to that OT/IT convergence, digital transformation, and making sure that you have the best of both worlds.
Yeah.
But it takes a different mindset, it takes a different skill set. And, you really have to look at it holistically. You can't be one-sided, just the data side or just the building automation side. You have to look at this holistically from an enterprise side. If you want to think of a data center as an enterprise, you've got the whole piece of it.
I was just going to talk about thought leadership, and kind of reflecting back on the beginning of our conversation about, bringing the Velta technology into design group. I think, if that didn't happen, I'm sure design group would be continuing to design and deploy BMS and EPMS solutions across data centers. But I can almost guarantee you we wouldn't be talking about this. And so having thought leaders like yourself, Dino, and yourself, Craig, combined with these automation solutions that we're deploying in the industry like data center, I feel like we're sort of on the cutting edge, right?
Yeah.
And kind of going back to that 1 + 1 = 3, we're talking about this regularly now. And I think we're one of the forefront, large SIs that are helping educate not only our clients, but educating the entire ecosystem, the entire industry.
Yeah, the industry, a good point, because even some of our technology partners, struggle with how to take the technology that they develop and actually position it the way it needs to be positioned within their client base, right? They struggle with that also, which is why they look for partners like us to be able to help them.
Yeah, it's a great time. It's a great place to be in, and you're right. It's changing rapidly, and we just have to continue to educate on protecting and educate on how to design it up front. Back to the do it now or do it again later, as Cisco would say often.
Yeah, exactly.
Thanks for tuning in to the Industrial Cybersecurity Insider. To stay up to date with our latest episodes, be sure to click the follow or subscribe button now. And if you found this podcast helpful or have a topic you'd like us to discuss, please leave us a review or let us know. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.